everyone, so I thought that today I would do a tutorial on how to ice a layer cake. I know that it's something that a lot of people don't know how to do and it can be kind of tricky to get started. I remember when I started, I think one of the first cakes that I did, I had crumbs all through the icing and it just looked like a giant circle. So over the years I've perfected techniques to make it look a lot more professional, so I just thought that I would share some today. So before we talk about icing a layer cake, you've got to cut up your cake into layers. So usually when I bake a cake, I always say in my recipes to use more than one tin. So ideally you would have 2 tins of the same size, so then you can bake it in 2 and either just lay them on top of each other if you only want a double layer cake, or then it's much easier to cut them in half without having to cut one cake into 4 or 5 layers. But if you don't have more than one tin of the same size, you can cut a cake into multiple layers. So I already have my cake layers here, but I have some photos in the post about this cake that show you how you can cut the layer cake. It's pretty easy. I always used to get my dad to do it for me because he was always a lot better at it than me. So we basically just get a knife and chop through the layer, either with a really sharp knife or a bread knife. So the other thing that I like to use is one of these. So basically it's just like a big frame and it's got a piece of wire in between, and they're called like cake slicers or anything like that, and you basically just make a small cut first with the cake and then you use that to run the rest of the way through, and it gives you a really nice even cut, so that's why I really like these. Some other stuff that I like to use is this cake turntable. I find these really helpful because you can put it on and then you can just turn it so that you can ice all around the cake, and you can do it without having to move yourself around the cake. And I also use a very long spatula for doing the sides and the top of the cakes. And a smaller spatula for more delicate or fiddly bits as well. Or if I'm doing a smaller cake, then I just use the small spatula. So I have my cake layers here. So I'm going to move the first one onto the turntable and take it off the baking paper that it's on. So usually you probably start with one facing upwards so that there's not as many crumbs, and then you take a big dollop of icing, put it on the cake and then spread it around. So you just need to spread, usually I'm not very technical in terms of, take half a cup or quarter of a cup or something like that. I actually like my layers fairly thick, so I make sure that I have enough to spread all the way to the edges and it still be a nice amount of icing. Obviously it doesn't, you don't want it to be thicker than the cake because you need a good cake to icing ratio.
Talk about your turntable.
What?
Talk about your turntable.
Oh, so as you can see when I'm spreading it, it's much easier to have the turntable because you just turn it around wherever you want to go, which is really nice. The funny thing about buying this turntable is that I bought it quite a few years ago now off eBay. So they're really cheap, you can buy them off eBay for really cheap. But when I bought it, my mum said that it was so silly and I'd never use it, and I use it all the time, so just one of those things. So when you've spread all of the icing on the cake layer, then you basically just repeat until you get to the top cake layer. So you basically just repeat this step with all the remaining cake layers. Put it on. So now we're going to ice the top of this. So the cake that I am making, by the way, is from my favourite chocolate cake recipe. I'll put the link down in the description. So the cake is a galaxy layer cake that I found on sweetappalita.com and made some adjustments. So it's got purple icing and sprinkles, and I'm making it for a colleague's daughter's birthday, and she's turning 6. So I thought she would really like the purple. So when you ice the top, you want to make sure that you have a generous amount of icing, so that you can spread it right to the edges and slightly over the edges, like so. Makes it easier when you start to ice down the sides, and it also makes it easier to try and make the top flatter when you already have a reasonable amount of icing to work with. So, I usually don't bother doing a crumb coat just on the top, just because this recipe that I use for my favourite chocolate cake doesn't really need it, because the top is usually not sticky enough that I get crumbs through the icing. But I do often do crumb coat down the sides, because down the sides there are often a lot of crumbs in the icing, and then it looks a bit gross. For those of you that don't know what a crumb coat is, it's basically just a really, really thin layer of icing that goes all around the sides, and then you put the cake to rest in the fridge, or if it's a cold day you can just leave it out for around 15 minutes just to set, and that is, you call it a crumb coat because it seals in the crumbs. And then when you go to put a thicker layer of icing on the top, then you don't get crumbs all throughout that top layer of icing, which makes it look really nice. So now I'm going to show you how to do the crumb coat. So you just want a little bit of extra icing around the sides. It doesn't need to be a lot, because like I said, it's a really thin layer that you want. So it doesn't matter if it looks bad or anything like that, because that's not going to be the final layer that you see. Voila! So everything is just covered in a really thin layer of icing. And now I'm just going to put that in the fridge for 10 to 15 minutes until it sets. So 15 minutes later, and our cake is nice and set and ready for the last finishing touches. So the way that I ice the sides is not very scientific or technical or anything like that. I basically just take a big blob of icing and use the palette knife spatula and push it off onto the side, and basically just hold it there so that it doesn't drop down too much, and then spread it around just like that. So I mean, obviously I'm going to get some on the bottom there, but that's okay because we're not serving it on the turntable. If you're serving it on the turntable, you might want to get a cloth and wipe it all off afterwards. So make sure you get it up to the top, and then around the sides. And if you get any cake showing, you want to cover that up to make it look really nice. So just so as long as you have enough icing, it's good to put a thicker layer on now, and then when you go around to tidy it up later, then you're not going to take all the icing off the sides. So as long as you've got a fair amount of icing, don't be scared about putting a lot on the cake, because you'll take some off later. So to finish, I'm going to use my big spatula, and I'm going to start by doing the top, I think. So you basically just smooth it all around the top. So get rid of all the big bits that are jutting out along the sides, and you basically just can keep twirling the cake turntable and keep smoothing out the icing until you get a really flat top. Like that. And then to do the sides, you angle your palette knife. I usually just do kind of like straight up and down. And then you just turn the turntable and move your hand around as well at the same time. And see how you're getting a really nice smooth finish? So that works really well for getting the cake to look really nice. So just keep going. Keep going. Keep going. And we're back to the start. So as you can see, that's why you need a lot of icing, because you actually end up taking off quite a lot of the icing when you go around and make it all nice and pretty. So basically what I usually do is kind of just keep playing with it until it's really straight and the edges are quite square. So like I like to have like a really straight 90-degree edge, well semi 90 degrees, so like that, rather than a big rounded top. But it definitely depends on the look you're going for. So this is just quite a normal, traditional sort of style. And you can see like when I've pushed some of the icing, smoothed it around some of the sides here, it's pushed it up on the top. So then you just want to try and take the edge off without pushing it back over the side, because then you'll just end up in an endless loop of pushing around the top and around the side as well. So here down the bottom, you probably can't see, but there's a bit of cake showing because the icing's got a bit thin. So what I'm going to do is get my smaller palette knife and just patch it up a bit, and then use the big one to go around again. So now we have a nice finish again. So if you want to get a nice straight edge, just wipe your palette knife off so that it's clean, and then you can use it to kind of cut the icing away a bit. Like so. Cool. So I'm pretty happy with that. I've got a nice straight cake with a good semi 90-degree angle. So it's actually a lot easier than you think. I mean, it was a lot easier than I thought to stop doing my round ball cakes and move to my straight edge cakes. And the big palette knives are not very expensive. If you're in New Zealand, I bought this one from Wilson's, and they have a range of different sizes that you can get, or you can also get something called a bench scraper, which is basically just like a plastic half circle about that big. And then you can use it in a similar sort of way, so you just hold it and run it around the edge of the cake like that. So let me know what you think in the comments, and I hope that this helped you to ice your layer cakes in the future. Thanks.